WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on air. I want to thank you for being with us today. Each and every Tuesday, we come to you at 2:30, simulcast on WCLN Radio, Star Communications TV. The subject today is child abuse, and we've got a couple of folks that know something about that. We got Alexis Bumgarner with us, and she is a Child Protective Services Supervisor. Alexis, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And we have a return guest, Rhonda Matthews. Rhonda, you also have that same title, and you're with the same department. And I want to kind of thank you for returning. Sometimes, you know, folks will have to explain, well, this is not that bad. So apparently we had a pretty good show last time you were here.
Yes, I appreciate being offered the chance.
Both you guys have expertise and backgrounds. Alexis, you have a master's in social work. And of course, you started in 2019, I think, got promoted to supervisor.
Yes, recently promoted to supervisor in January of this year.
And of course, you know, Rhonda, I think the last time, as I recall, you've been there since 2014. Is that?
That's correct.
And you haven't had a military connection.
Yes.
Tell us about that before we get started here. I always like to throw that in. I so salute the military for what they do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I served in the United States Air Force from 2000 to 2003. I was a weather forecaster.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So the subject today is child abuse. And one of the things that I'm reminded of in April, we're just kind of, I guess we're propelled to have a conversation about child abuse because April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. And there's certain things that people have seen, you know, the little wheels that's turning that's blue. And of course, the Child Advocacy Center is doing a lot of stuff. And Shannon Barber's just really big advocate of that. So let's open kind of, I guess, big, if you will, and look at it from the sense of what you guys do, if you don't mind, in that particular area with the Department of Social Services, and what your charge is. What you wake up and you go to that office, or you go in the morning, what is that mission that you're about? And I'd love to kind of get your sense of that from both of you, maybe. And I'll start with, let's start with our newest guest first, Alexis.
So as far as you said, the charge, kind of what gets us going, every day is different. When you walk into the office, you don't know if it's going to be a quiet day, which is usually very rare. But just knowing that if we do receive a Child Protective Services report, that we have to do everything humanly possible to make sure that child is safe. And that if that child is in an unsafe position, we have to make sure that they are safe. So that's really what strives us, or keeps us going. We have a huge heart for the job, for our families, and working with children. And your other question was about kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Just give us an idea of what your day looks like. You might not want to get into some of the major dynamics, but just kind of a general overview.
So as far as the supervisor role, let's say someone calls into DSS, they make a Child Protective Services report. Once we receive that report, we have to go by our state guidelines on whether we screen in that report, which means we would accept it and work with the family, or if it doesn't meet the definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency, then we would not accept that case. So once, let's say we accept that case, we have to provide it to the social worker. Usually the supervisor and social worker will, discuss the allegations in the report, try to make contact with the family to schedule a time to meet with them, to go over the report, discuss what concerns there are. Anytime that we are working with a family, we have to do what's called a safety plan. And basically what that is if there are concerns that need to be addressed, we work with the family of, okay, well, substance use is a concern. So what can we do in order to make sure that the children are safe? So it's really something that we discuss with the family. We want the parents' opinions of, okay, well, I see there's some safety concerns as far as the home. What can we do to correct this? Or what can we do to work together to ensure that the home is safe for the child? So it's really a collaborative effort with the family to make sure that the children are ultimately safe and that the parents have the tools to succeed as parents.
Rhonda, I'm going to kind of move to you on that. These different things that she's talking about, that Alexis is talking about, when you see those things come up, is there a broad range, or you see a lot of the same kinds of things come in that are case related that you have to look at?
Well, there's a broad range of things that we screen for, but for our county and for the past year, we've seen trends in the type of reports that we're getting. We see a lot of substance abuse reports, a lot of substance affected infants over the last year. We've seen an increase in dependency cases since COVID started as a result of children with behavior problems and parents can no longer care for them. So there is a broad spectrum of the types of things we see, and it kind of goes in waves at times as to what is coming in more frequently. At one time, meth use was a large problem. Not to say that it's not anymore, but recently over the last year, it's been primarily reports regarding heroin use, substance use, infants born positive to drugs and dependency.
Is there a nexus when we use the word substance use with various kinds? Is it alcohol? Is it marijuana? Is it cocaine? Is it meth? Is it all intermixed and interrelated in addiction issues? And how does that look from what you see as it relates to males, females, family members in the sense of close family, i.e. parents, or is it family members that may be part of or maybe extended family members? Kind of give us a picture of some of the kinds of things when you look at that. And I think one of the things, Alexis, you mentioned is that you have to determine, does it meet a protocol before you move forward with it? Can anybody, I guess anybody can just call in and report something, so you got to validate that report.
Yes.
Kind of give us a feel for that as well.
Yes, anyone can call in and make a report. And if I will say this, if you see something, say something. I mean, it's never going to harm anyone to make the report. It may not meet our criteria. And to answer your question about substance use, our policy is very clear to say that there are certain things that have to go along with the substance use. We're not going to screen in a report if somebody says, Dad comes home after work and drinks. We have to be able to show what is the substance and how is it impacting the care of the child. So whenever a report is made, as much detail as possible is needed to show how is that particular substance, and it can range from anything from alcohol, marijuana, to all the illicit drugs. How is that impacting them? And that's what we determine as to how we screen that in.
Alexis, when a lot of these things are cleared and you actually maybe find with those protocols, everything comes together and you actually do what I would say would be kind of a field trip or a home visit or what have you. What happens when you go to that door, and what pre-planning is involved before you go to that door and knock on that door? And do you have some apprehension about that?
So as far as the pre-planning, it really just depends on the case and the family. Of course, you want to know who all lives in the home, because we want to make sure that we talk to everyone. We want to see all the children to make sure that they're safe and doing well. Sometimes there is a little bit of apprehension, yes, to be honest. I think because of possibly the seriousness of the report. For example, if we receive a report with allegations of physical or sexual abuse, that is something where we would go to the home without calling first and discussing those allegations with the alleged perpetrator or the parents could possibly turn into kind of some pushback from the parents, because those are hard things to hear, that, you know, if your child has said, okay, well, yes, I've been abused by this individual, that's hard as a parent to hear no matter what. There's always open communication between a social worker and the supervisor in case the social worker might need backup from law enforcement just as a safety precaution. Sometimes we do have social workers go out together to just work with the family, make them feel a little bit more comfortable. So there is some conversations before a social worker goes out to a home, and conversations while they're at the home as well, to discuss what did they see, how did the interviews go, was there any concerns that the children disclosed or the parents. And usually we will discuss, well, the safety plan, what kind of safety plan can we put in place to make sure that these children are safe. So there's several different areas that we cover whenever a social worker is first going to meet with a family.
Rhonda, I get a sense of a high drama that is occurring at that moment that you decide, well, all the protocols are there, we've got to go to this location, we've got to knock on this door, and all of a sudden somebody comes to the door and you're there to announce, first of all, who you are. It's what I understand Alexis is saying. I want to kind of come back from break. We're going to take a break in just a few seconds here, but I want to come back from break and kind of address that particularly, and I'll start with you when we come back, to talk about what that sense is. I mean, you know the neighborhoods, you've done kind of a review of that, but just kind of give us a sense of that approach to the door as somebody walks to the door and you're standing there, and let folks kind of feel what you're going through.
Okay.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking about key issues facing child abuse and prevention, and folks that do this on a daily basis. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home, so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know It's on there. J.W. Simmons here, your host. We're pleased to have you each and every week on the show. We're talking about child prevention, child abuse today. Alexis Bumgarner. Alexis, you have a master's in social work, started in Sampson County with DSS in March 2019. You're a supervisor, recently promoted 2021. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You have the experience in various fields of child safety, group home, case management, interim guardian at Litem. Rhonda Matthews, you've been here before, and good to see your smile again. And you've been employed with a little bit longer, since 2014. You have a bachelor's degree in psychology, University of Maryland. Served for 3.5 years in the United States Air Force as a weather forecaster, 2000-2003, Sampson County native.
Yes.
And you live here with your husband and five children.
Yes.
So thanks again for being here. We went to break. Alexis kind of set it up for us. This approach to the door, something meets all the protocols. Somebody's called in. There's a complaint levied in regards to child abuse, and you're walking to that door. Pick us up from there and the knock on the door, and just give us a typical kind of thing of what happens. And how do you even approach a subject of that nature? I mean, obviously, we talked about that maybe law enforcement might be needed. How do you determine if you need law enforcement or you need a paramedic? I don't know. How do you do that?
So for us, there's two different tracks that we follow. There's a family assessment and an investigative assessment. For family assessments, walking up to that door is a little bit easier because we're allowed to call the family ahead of time and say, I'm with social services, I need to come out and speak with you. So they know we're coming and they've had time to process that. For the investigative cases, we show up unannounced. We don't call ahead. And just for myself, I can't speak for the other social workers, but there is always a period of nervousness before walking up to the door, not knowing what you're about to walk into. And what I found over the years is that the key to talking with the families and de-escalating what I've had parents yell at me. Social workers have had the door answered with parents holding guns before. It all depends on how you present the situation to the parent. You stay calm. You explain to them, we're not here to remove your children. We just want to talk to you about what's in this report first. And that makes all the difference in how the family reacts. Sometimes it's not good. Sometimes you realize that talking and trying to de-escalate the situation with your words is not working. And I have about 5 different law enforcement officers' phone numbers on my phone on standby. I know that they will always come and help us whenever we need it. And sometimes we're familiar with families, so we know if they're going to be hostile or, volatile with us, so we will take additional social workers with us. A lot of the times, the first few minutes, there's some, I'm just not nice conversations with the parents. That is common because they're being presented with information they don't want to hear, they don't want to accept. But really just letting them know we're there to help them. We're not there for them to be in trouble. A lot, sometimes they think they're in trouble. That does make all the difference.
Do you find times that both you guys go at the same time? Is it important sometimes to have more than one person, even though you think everything is kind of okay, or do you just go up there? Pretty brave, I guess, to just go up there by yourself sometimes, because you really don't know what you might anticipate it, but on the other side of that door, because we talked a little bit about substance abuse and this kind of thing, which is prevalent and so forth everywhere, not just in this area, but everywhere. So you really don't know what is going to happen when that door opens. I don't want to build a drama too high, but I'm kind of looking for that real truth. Is that apprehension there?
Absolutely, the apprehension is there, and you don't ever ultimately know what you're going to open the door to find. Typically with our newer workers, they almost always go out with a seasoned worker, no matter what the report is, just so they can see how it's done and they have that backup. But yes, there is apprehension there when it comes to the very serious cases, and there's really no way you can be prepared other than just to hold your breath, put on a smile, and let the family know you're there to help. And
it really depends on the family. Every family is different. So there are some where they're actually thankful that we are there because we can point them in the right direction of different resources, such as they need help finding a medical provider for their children, or they need assistance with applying for health insurance, such as Medicaid, or finding a mental health provider. So sometimes we do have those families who are thankful that we stepped in and are kind of the middle person to help them, point them in the right direction of different resources in the community.
How often do you find a situation where, and I don't know that this is a label child abuse or not, but where there's, and we've used all kinds of language to not say this, but I'll just say it what it is. Children are hungry and they don't have food, and we come up with terms now, food challenged or something, but the bottom line is we're saying children don't have, number one, food, and if they do, they don't have proper nutrition and that kind of thing. How often do you see that where children just are not the basics, clothed, cleanliness, nutrition? How often does that become a key issue?
That's a common issue that we see. For us, that falls under what is considered improper care.
Yeah.
And those types of cases are ones where we try to do a lot of front loading to our families. We offer them support through services like Medicaid, food stamps, Work First, the WIC department, to try to get them additional, food sources.
There's different food drives usually where,
food banks.
Yeah.
So we have the opportunity in those cases to help the families and give them the things that they're needing. That's not one where we would typically go in and remove a child. We would try to do a lot of front loading to try to help them out and get them where they need to be so that they can provide those things for their children.
Is the problem pervasive in the sense that there's been, typically what I find when I'm having these conversations is folks will say to me, well, parents tend to parent as they were parented. There's no certification, there's no driver's manual, there's nothing, and all of a sudden now before you is you've given birth to one of the most precious things in the world, but yet everything else you do in life, there's certifications. I mean, you guys are sitting in front of me with all kinds of academic degrees and master's degrees to do your job, but nothing to be a parent. Is that where we're missing this whole process of childcare? That maybe if this is I'm probably getting some bad feedback with this, but maybe we need some way to say, here's some things you need to consider if you're going to be a mother or a father. Here's some things you need to consider. Granted, as a father, there's a lot of stuff I didn't get right. I don't know that I must have missed that chapter, but there's some pretty horrendous things that are just. Folks will look at you or me or all of us or be listening today and they'll say, well, some of these things is common sense. Do you see some common sense things that's just not been observed or read?
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that parents typically raise in the way that they were raised. I think there is a lot to be said for that. One of the things that we have tried to do, and we actually have a program within our agency now, is to offer parenting classes for situations like that to try to sort of restructure the way the parents think about certain areas like discipline or how they speak to their children. And I don't think that it's that they don't want to do it. I think that, they were raised in a certain environment and that's how they have always known to do. And so we just try to get them to retrain the way they think.
Alexis, I know when I was talking about it, I saw your eyes kind of open real wide. It's like you wanted to say something. I want to get your input on that because I do hear that. Oftentimes folks will say, well, they need to understand they don't know how to raise a child. And I don't know that any of us are perfectionists with this. But at the same time, you do see cases that I'm sure you think, my gracious, this is basic stuff here, like change the diaper or something.
Right. So whenever you were talking about it, we hear a lot from parents where they will say, well, my mom did such and such when I was a child, and I never got a CPS report on me. So that's when we have to explain, yes, this may have happened when you were a child. Your parent may have done this, but let's look at it in a different light. What can we do differently to make sure that the child is safe and their needs are being met? And a lot of times that's really difficult for parents because they were raised a certain way and they may have a few kids in the home and they've always done things the way they thought was right as a parent. So we really have to approach that very gently of taking a different approach to parenting because the child may have certain developmental needs or mental health needs. So the parent has to parent them in a different way than what they're used to.
I think this is the critical kind of nexus where we are in the conversation, which I guess for some degree or to a greater degree leads us to this conversation, Rhonda, about what is parenting as it relates to discipline. And does discipline, i.e. entertain the context of the big stick kind of thing, or does timeout mean timeout in your room with your tablet so you can still do Zoom or whatever, or is timeout under the stairs in the dark, with the lights out for extended period of time, and just fundamental kinds of questions. So I want to kind of set the stage for that when we come back from our next break that we're fixing to take. Okay. I want to set the stage for that and maybe, and again, start back with either one of you on that subject, because I think there is that beckoning question out there, because I remember discipline, and my discipline memories is probably different than a lot of other folks' discipline memories. So let's come back and start with that. What does discipline mean? and what is abuse in that factor. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Call a friend, stay tuned. We're talking about child abuse. We'll be back in a moment.
At home or away, knowing who is at your door is priceless. Star Communications is here to help with its doorbell security camera by Skybell. Live viewing and two-way audio equips you with the ability to always see and greet anyone that shows up at your door. If this is the kind of confidence you are looking for, call Star Communications today at 1-800-706-6538 to learn more about this intelligent security that you can always depend on.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you again for being with us today. We're talking with two folks about child prevention, child abuse. Alexis, Bumgarner, both of these folks are supervisors with DSS. Rhonda Matthews, we went to break. We were talking about this whole idea of abuse. We've talked about up to the door approach. You've talked about protocols, the kinds of things that you assess and look at. The big areas, that one of the biggest areas, of course, I think we talked a bit about was the nutrition and food area. But the other areas in discipline, historically, different people were brought up in different environments. The whole kind of thing of physical efforts to discipline, i.e. spankings. Is that something with your hand? Is it with a paddle? Historically, schools decades back had this thing where if you used a certain kind of paddle, it was okay. We're in a different era.
Yes, we are.
Clear the smoke for us on this and give us the real world today view on punishment, utilizing physical punishment.
So for us, and I'm glad you mentioned it because it's something our parents ask us about frequently. Their train of thought is, oh, you're saying I can't spank my kid. But for us, our policy, our CPS policy and the law was very clear for us. In that you can discipline your children. There is nothing that says you cannot spank your child, but you cannot leave a mark or a bruise lasting longer than 24 hours. That's a line in the sand for DSS and when we're looking whether we're going to screen a report in or not. But something also that we would take into account is the age of the child. Obviously, if you have a small infant that's being punished in that way, we would, have a problem with that too. We would want to assess that family. But that for us is the defining factor. Yes, the law says you can spank your children. It just says there's a point at which you can't leave a mark or a bruise on them lasting longer than 24 hours.
Alexis says the thing that bothers me in that observation that there's no legal challenge that would prevent a parent from spanking. We use that word and it's a general term. What does spanking mean? Does it mean, hand? Does it mean with a stick? Does it mean whatever? And I think what you alluded to, Rhonda, was that if there's bruising, scarring, extensive pain, and so forth. With that said, let's kind of dig into that a little bit deeper, and which is going to ultimately, hopefully, get us into the emotional aspect. But the results of that, there's certain studies out that indicate that basically creates in that child's mind a continuation of that. So you have a generational thing where this child gets to be 10, 15, 20 years old. They have a child. Well, this is, as we talked about, this is what my parents did, so they do it. Is there some point in time that we need to draw a line in the sand and say, wait a minute, that's not correct? Then we look at behavior, and I'll have people call, or they'll do their email thing and go, I'll tell you I'll beat my child. Help us kind of get into that mode of better understanding. Because as Rhonda said, I know you guys face it all the time.
We do. So as far as discipline, we always have to go by what the state says. So if the state ends up changing policy and says, okay, parents can no longer spank their child in any form or fashion, then we would have to go by that. But for now, they can spank their child, but they just can't leave any marks or bruises lasting longer than 24 hours. But it also discusses your intent. Is the parent's intent to cause physical harm to that child, or is their intent to, okay, I need to show my child that the action they just did was not correct. So for instance, let's say a parent is trying to discipline their child, but they start physically punching the child with a closed fist. That's different than spanking your child with an open hand. An open hand is not going to cause as much physical pain as a closed fist. Once you have a closed fist, then it's considered punching, and that's not okay for a parent to do.
Rhonda, I'm going to turn back to you because you've got a degree in psychology. So do you see some psychological things occurring with some of the child abuse situation in which the innate frustration of parents and the demand of parenting oftentimes results in what Alexis is just talking about, closed fists as opposed to open fists, and they're expressing their rage on that child? And I don't want to get too deep in psychology. I mean, we could go to a whole other show, but is that something that psychologically that parents need to ask themselves for their own psychological assessment? Why am I doing this? Is it for me to express my anger, or am I really disciplining? And is discipline defined different than what I'm doing? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think that is something that parents need to ask themselves. One of the things that I've told families in the past that I work with, there's not one family I've ever come across that I doubt for a second that they love their child. I know that these parents love their children. But I think the factors that play into the family dynamics, whether it's the loss of a job, a divorce, addiction, those are the things that put that parent in a situation where they're not able to think through the discipline fully. So I do think there are psychological factors and impacts from what's going on with the family that lead to what is intended to be discipline to change a behavior. It turns into something that's left a mark or has turned into punching. And I don't think any of that's ever intentional, but it is something that we come across and the parents need to think about before they discipline a child, or they calm before they go in to spank the child. For the past year, with the pandemic world going on, we saw some slight shifts in numbers. I think from like maybe 500 to 550, and maybe some numbers had dropped a little bit in the number of reported cases. I mean, 500 cases is a lot still a year for child abuse, in my opinion. But when we see that drop, do you think that means that child abuse is not occurring because children were at home? Is there a direct relationship with children in a school setting in which teachers have some experience in training and identifying if a child is being neglected or abused and reporting it? So if they're not there, it seems the numbers would be a little bit lower. Tell us what the pandemic has done as related to child abuse. Yes, I think that's been a huge factor. For the first two months after the pandemic started, there was a quiet. It was almost like we had little to no cases during those first 2 months. Children were at home. Teachers were getting used to virtual learning. We had a significant drop during those 2 months, but I think after that it started to pick back up again, but I think that accounts for the difference in cases. But teachers are one of our best assets when it comes to knowing the signs, reporting, helping us work with the families. So when they have not been at school, I don't think it's an instance where the neglect or the abuse is not occurring. I think it's that the teachers are not able to see it as clearly because of the virtual environment. Alexis, can you be around a child, or can you, and I'm just going to use this as kind of an example, the skills and visual abilities you guys have, do you see things that you just look at and it causes you to ponder, do I have a problem here? Maybe it's not been reported. Maybe you're in an environment where there's other people, and all of a sudden either one of you see something, and does your mind get triggered to go, well, let me look at that again. Has that ever happened? Yes. With the environment that we work in and day out, you always
kind of take a second look if something just doesn't look right between the child and parent interactions. You always want to pay a little bit closer attention if kind of a red flag is going off, just to see, well, is there a safety concern that I need to report it to DSS for them to further investigate or assess the family? So I think that's always kind of on our radar, and hopefully it should be on other people's radar as well.
Rhonda, you've been doing this a little bit longer. Have you ever had a case that you just felt like, I've got to intervene right now, I got to deal with something right now? Has that ever occurred?
Absolutely. And there are times when we are not quite sure what's happening, but we're getting the sense that this child is not acting right, they should be doing this, or child's not looking at the parent, or they seem afraid. We have a child abuse specialist that we consult with. Her name is Dr. Danielle Thomas Taylor, and she assists us with cases where we need help determining if abuse is occurring. But yes, that has happened to me quite frequently, and
I've had folks to mention that, and it kind of came as a result of talking with some people that do this kind of thing. But the thing that strikes me with what you just said is that if you recognize something of that nature, if we could get a heightened sense of awareness by all of the other folks out there in the community, we may be able to curb some of this early on. But at the same time, I want to kind of stage, because we're coming up on our last segment, I want to kind of stage this other area that kind of falls into child abuse as well, and that's the psychological abuse, not the hitting, not that kind of thing, but just the psychological kind of torment of shaming, of loud voices, of words like disgusted and you are, and fill in the blank, and all those kinds of things. They're pretty horrific as well. So when we come back from break, I'd love to pick that up and kind of cover some of those areas as well. So I think the dynamic of this is, hopefully we're messaging to the folks listening today and watching that there is a way that they can reach out, and we're going to be giving folks those numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us. We're coming up on this last segment of the show. I want to remind you to stay tuned, call a friend. We'll be back in one moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for being with us today. We're coming up on our last segment of a show called We Should Know. I'm J.W. Simmons, your host. I want to give you kind of a lead-in on how you reach us. Your comments, questions, support is tremendous. Continue to email us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Your commentary is just great for us. It gives us some leads on conversations we need to have, things and folks we need to talk to, when we're more than happy to explore and investigate some of those things and get the experts on so you can hear from them exactly what's going on in that particular area. The other address that you may need to know, and some of you drop us a card periodically, is Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. That's Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Just put on the card We Should Know, or WSK, and we'll get your note. We'll take a look at it, and we'll see if we can make something happen with it, and we will do that for you, and we always appreciate those comments. Today we're talking about child prevention, child abuse. We're talking with Alexis Bumgarner. We're talking with Rhonda Matthews, both supervisors with the Department of Social Services in the particular area of dealing with these kinds of issues. As we went to break, we talked about a lot of different things that relate to, should I say, dealing with adolescent care. And one of those things I wanted to get into is this area of neglect, emotional kinds of neglect, or should I say, not necessarily the physical kinds of things that people do that is harmful, but the behavioral kinds of things that children get exposed to, everything from shaming to blaming to just loud and angry conversation. You don't have to touch a child to scar a child. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that and walk us through some of these things that may be going on. Is that maybe sometimes parents don't really realize they're acting out their own lack of ability to deal with the world in front of their child, and their child is absorbing that.
So some of the things that you've just described as far as the shaming and the blaming, for us, that falls under the category of emotional abuse that we would investigate. Mm-hmm. And we use certain tools when we are investigating that. It's one of the hardest things for us to prove at DSS when we're looking at that, but we typically use a child and family evaluation. We call it a CFE at the agency, but it's where we get a psychologist to come in and interview all the family members and sort of make a recommendation on whether they believe it's likely that emotional abuse has occurred. And they don't just do evaluations for emotional abuse, but that's typically one of the times we use it. One of the hard things about that is, and it touches on something you said earlier, parents often parent in the way that they were parented. So a lot of times it's a continuation, this type of shaming, and just a continuation of how they were raised. So for us, it's just important to use that CFE tool, use that psychologist that we speak with. But it is difficult by the time that it's come to our attention. The child is starting to exhibit behaviors to the point where, this has already been happening for quite a while. So it's already impacted them. There's going to have a more lasting effect.
Alexis, do you think that oftentimes a child is, their mind is like little recorders and they hear everything that goes on, even if it's not intended for them? If the family is having a discussion, or if there's a marital issue in the family that gets very vocal, that child is absorbing that. And at different ages, I've read where different ages absorb that in different ways and thus act it out in that classroom at school or on the playground. Help us understand that as well.
So people would be very surprised that children are extremely perceptive, especially younger children. They are like a sponge. So they can pick up on verbal altercations, tension, if a parent is acting negatively towards them. Children pick up on all of that, and they internalize it as well, to where you see the effects of it as they get a little bit older. So that's really something that parents should be cognizant of, is when they're communicating with their children, even if the children are outside, if you're anywhere in a surrounding distance of your child, just be careful of how you're acting, how you're treating other people, how you're treating the children, the conversations you have with different family members or friends, because the way the parent is acting or treating others, the child is going to mimic that as they get older. So that's really important for parents to know.
Even to the verbalization and the words, if the parent throws something across the table, the child may do something with a toy at kindergarten.
Yes, we see that all the time.
And that gives you a clue, but it's only part of the protocol that you have to have. I think one of the things that often I hear too is that there's a greater expectation than what your legal ability is to intervene. Is that?
Yes, we have to be very careful about how we work with our families. We're very family-centered, and we try to always make sure that the family is creating the safety plan with us, that they are in agreement with the safety plan. And then we also have to explain to them, if they're not in agreement with us, what steps we have to take next to make sure that they have all of their constitutional rights are kept intact.
One of the things is, as we're talking, it just struck me, every day, it doesn't matter whether it's morning, noon, afternoon, and even the TV will come on, and if it's something to deal with the weather, we know a lot about the weather. And we know it immediately. We know it spontaneously. I mean, if it's a thundercloud coming through, we know so much about it. But we get very little messaging, unless I'm missing something. But it seems that we get very little messaging about prevention of child abuse. Do we need to change that paradigm a bit?
I believe that we do, and I actually believe that Sampson County has done a lot of really hard work over the last several years to get more of the word out, with the creation of the Child Advocacy Center and the fundraisers and the things that they're doing. We have a really wonderful multidisciplinary team that we work with that covers school systems, medical personnel, law enforcement, counseling centers. And we've also done presentations with the school systems in Sampson County just to discuss mandated reporting, what is abuse, and they are hoping that information will spread. But Sampson County, I believe, has worked very, very hard to change that so that it's not just once a year we're talking about it.
What's the church's role? Religion is a strong core of our belief and our faith and a very important part of our structure as a family and society, particularly in the United States, and particularly, I would say, in rural eastern North Carolina. What's the church's role, as you see it, in this whole arena of parenting, child prevention, child abuse prevention, those kinds of things? What would that role be? And do you guys even go into churches and talk to folks?
So a lot of families who do have a belief or do attend church, they really see that as a strong sense of support as a family. We've seen where some families would rather go in and speak with their pastor rather than going to a mental health facility for counseling. And that's a really good support system that families do have, because they have that pastor or attend church services where they can lean on others for their parenting needs, or their belief is really an important foundation of that family.
So I would think that if we said today to folks that if you would like to have somebody in your role or a similar role to come out and speak to a church group, is that something they could call
Absolutely.
The number that we're going to put on the screen and actually schedule that, Rhonda?
Yes, absolutely.
And should they give you an idea of what they want you to talk about, or can you just do a general presentation?
Either one, whatever they're more comfortable with. They can tell us what they want to address, but we could also do sort of a day in the life of CPS and explain to them mandated reporting, what we investigate, and do a general presentation.
We've gone through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things we could do, and sometimes we get through. I often tell folks we could do a seminar and just continue to do a semester each week on this subject. I'll give you about 30 seconds each to do a quick wrap, and then we're going to have to go.
What I would like for the community to know, as far as what we do on a daily basis, I know sometimes Child Protective Services has a bad reputation. People think that we just want to take your children. Our main goal is to keep families together. We want to work with the families to give you services that help you in whatever situation you're in. And it's hard when we have to ask the difficult questions, but we really are asking those so that we can find the best ways to help you. And if you just remember that, I think we would be able to assist your family, and I just want the community to know we're there to help.
Okay, Alexis?
I think it's important for the community and families we work with to know that we honestly do care. We don't want to come in and remove the children from the home. We want to do everything we can to keep the family together. We do have a job to do, though, and our ultimate goal is to make sure that children are safe. But we're going to do everything in our power to make sure the children are safe, but that parents have the tools that they need to succeed as a parent. So I think that's important for the community to know.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here. And it's one of those jobs that is not only important, but it's critical. The big thing that often strikes me is seeing a child with a tear in their eyes and they are food deprived or what have you, and it's horrific. So thank you for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again next week. The name of the show is We Should Know, and as always, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.